Good evening, everybody. You know, there's a story about President Reagan, who came to the Alcatraz prison opposite San Francisco many years ago, and he had to address the inmates. He didn't know how to open up his address, so he said, "I'm glad you are all here." So, not comparing, God forbid, but I'm glad you're all here. And I'm especially glad to see young people, because an organization that's 50 years old sometimes may tend to be focused on older people, and the fact that there are young people here is very encouraging, because the missions that the organization and all of us face need young people. You know, rabbis of old used to say that sometimes to open up their sermons saying, "Before I speak, I'll say a few words." So I want to say a few words. This will not be the focus of my remarks, but on what's going on in Israel nowadays, because this is a gathering of lawyers and jurists, and it's not a good period government-wise, and the attitude of high-up people in government to the enforcement authorities, the way we've just witnessed a few days ago. There's one word that I'd like to use. It's not in English, it's not in Hebrew, it's in Yiddish, Gewalt. There's a kind of an eclipse, a deterioration in our body politic, maybe deteriorating to third elections in a year. There's no need for that. As a citizen, as a lawyer, as a jurist, I'm really super upset. I think that we should all support the legal authorities of the State of Israel, represented here by Dr. Shendorf. There are solutions. Whoever has to go to court will go to court, but for the government, for the body politic, the need to do something better is urgent. I was the secretary of the National Unity Government 30 plus years ago for 3.5 years, and this was not an ideal marriage, but it was reasonable and helped the State of Israel. To tell you frankly, I was about to go and demonstrate, and my granddaughter even drew a sign that I was supposed to carry. I didn't do it yet, I may still do it, but the sign says, it quotes a poem by Bialik, by our national poet, Bialik. We saw you again in your helplessness. And I added in the sign, pity, have pity on Israel. They call it in nice Hebrew, Rachmanis. And no third elections, and respect the legal authorities. Now let me go to the subject of our evening here. I wasn't fortunate to know Renee Kassel and Arthur Goldberg, but I knew well Chaim Cohen. In fact, we were friends despite the generational gap. I see here his son and his daughter-in-law. I didn't see you before. I'm happy to see you. We worked together at the embassy in Washington many years ago. Not always in agreement, but it was a good time. Chaim Cohen was a great jurist, he wrote also, for instance, about the trial of Jesus, which was to fight the image that Christianity for many years has built on the Jewish responsibility to Jesus' fate. In fact, we have here Dina Porat, who wrote about the Christian attitude nowadays, which is, thank God, much better. But Jews were in the forefront of fighting for human rights. René Cassin was mentioned, but we should mention also the book that was distributed here is basically on two major Jewish jurists, one more fortunate, one less. Herr Schlauterpacht was in front of human rights and the Nuremberg trials, etc. And Raphael Lemkin, a poor Jewish immigrant from Poland. Both were from Poland, in fact, from the same city. And he pushed with his poor and weak abilities in terms of financial support and everything, the idea of the genocide treaty, which was accepted later, a major achievement. When this organization was established back in 1969, this was right after the Six-Day War, and there were hopes, there was joy, but the Jewish solidarity that showed itself throughout the days of the pre-war and the war days gave this organization the impetus, or the founders got their inspiration from that period. And there were people who all witnessed, not personally, but witnessed in terms of the generation, the Holocaust, and what happened to Jews when nobody gave a hand. We are now, I myself, like Meir Lindsay, and I'm a son of a Holocaust survivor. All my father's family was shot into a mass grave in a little town in Belarus back in 1942. And my wife's family was all sent to Treblinka from Warsaw, from the Warsaw ghetto. And now we already have the third generation. And the Jewish common voice is as important as it was ever. The Jewish people cannot allow itself the luxury of everybody go their own way. And what we heard from Meir Lindsay and from Yitzhak Herzog is encouraging, because the anti-Semites do not distinguish between this Jew or that Jew, nor did the Nazis, nor did any anti-Semite throughout history. There was a rabbi in the Warsaw ghetto by the name of Rabbi Zemba. Mala Tabori, who once gave me his book. My father owned it. He perished in the ghetto, and he explains anti-Semitism as something that cannot be explained. That is, there's no rational basis for that. Sometimes they hate Jews because they are rich and well-off. Sometimes they hate them because they are poor and they see them as filthy. Sometimes because they are communists. Sometimes because they are capitalists. No explanation. And we can go on with that. You know, about 32 years ago, in 1987, I was the cabinet secretary of that national unity government, and I suggested to Prime Minister Shamir to monitor anti-Semitic phenomena. I wrote a memo in which I said, whoever believed that the victory on the Nazis also did away with anti-Semitism, or whoever believed that in the penultimate decade of the 20th century, there is no rise and there is no place for dark spirits that are against any logic and any facts. Those who believed in that were to be disappointed. This was a few years before the Zionism, racism resolution that President Herzog, my good friend, tore in the General Assembly was abrogated in the UN. And I said also in that memo, my feeling is that the matters, unfortunately, will become worse and worse in the coming years. And then we established a forum monitoring anti-Semitism. We had contacts with academic people. Again, I mentioned Mala before. Mala Tabori was here. She was one of our members on behalf of the fight for Soviet Jewry, and Dina Porat, who was a super expert on that throughout the years. A very central figure in the state of Israel, Shimon Peres, and always optimistic. When I went to see him, he was the foreign minister, to get him appoint a representative to our forum, he said, this is a quotation, Eli, governments have to deal with the present and the future. Anti-Semitism is the past. Why do you need to deal with it? Optimism. Unfortunately, the optimism wasn't justified. I'm mentioning that because people want to feel that, for God's sake, this is to be done away with. But let me tell you, don't quote me, anti-Semitism is not going away. It will be with us, it will be with our children and grandchildren, unfortunately, because it's one of those super old hatreds that don't go away. You take the book of Esther in the Bible, Haman says there's a nation dispersed and but among the nations and so on, and different from everybody. So what should we do? We should erase them. Then you read about Adrian, the great emperor who was here, and he's hated by the Jewish history because of his approach to the Bar Kokhba mutiny and the way he treats. I don't have the time to quote from the Midrash what he said. So at that time, we carved a few modes of combating anti-Semitism, because you have to continue, despite the fact that you know it's not going to go away. And some of them, in fact, all of them were mentioned by Yitzhak Herzog before. He spoke about defense, and then there's diplomacy, public diplomacy, private diplomacy. Then there is education, very important, although again, you shouldn't be too optimistic, but still you have to do it. And the legal side, which this organization is working on. And it became more difficult because of the networks and the internet. What used to be on much smaller scale, now in a second you can throw it throughout the world, every defamation. So, you know, I wrote an article in '95, sent it to me, in Justice, I forgot about it, on the combat of government of Israel against anti-Semitism in 1995, 25 years ago. I read it, it's like it's been written now. And I read government resolutions from 1989 and on, the same. So that doesn't mean we should be kind of pushed away or despair. No, but we should know that this is a very, very difficult job, and you have all the time new challenges. So let me conclude by saying, our sages say, לא עליך המלאכה לגמור והיית בן חורין להיבטל ממנה. The sages, the Jewish sages say, you are not bound to finish the job, but you're not free from not engaging in it. So I'd like to bless the organization. You know, 50 is the age of advice in the Jewish tradition. Why? One of our commentators in the Middle Ages, Ameiri, says, why 50 is the age of advice? Because at 50, you're already ripe enough to give advice, and you're still not senile enough not to be able to give it. So, I'd like to, I didn't mention the names of all the distinguished presidents of the organization because they were mentioned a few times, as if I mentioned them. Good luck in what you're doing. God bless you.